The Shack book first came out, I was talking to somebody and they were really upset about some things in the book. You know, one of those is the idea that God the Father did not retreat from Jesus on the cross. And I don't know if you guys knew this or not. My father died when I was 21. He had a brain aneurysm. We were having a combined service. Our pastor was being transferred, so we had like 400 people. This big combined, because he pastored 2 churches in a circuit, and we were having this big combined service to do a going away thing for their family. And my dad used to always tease the pastor's wife because she was from Michigan. He would, tease her about being a Yankee, and she was the sweetest lady you've ever met. Little tiny thing. She probably weighed about 95 pounds, and so my dad had this plaque made that it declared her an honorary Southern Belle. So he reads this inscription on the plaque and falls on his face on the stage with a brain aneurysm and died. And that morning I was getting ready to leave to go to college in Texas, and I wanted to have one last big weekend with my buddies. We called ourselves the Barbarians, and we would do these wilderness camping trips, and we wanted to go to the Outer Banks, the uninhabited smaller Outer Banks. There's one in particular called Shackleford Island, and we wanted to go out there. It's only accessible by boat or air, and my dad didn't think I was experienced enough to take the boat across the channel, out offshore that far. And it turned into a big argument that morning where we were yelling at each other, and it was really ugly. And then, we got in the car, we went to church. We didn't speak all the way to church. And when we got to church, I went and talked to my friends, and my dad was, talking to his friends or whatever. And we never had a chance to make it right. And during the part after the main service, he died. And I never had a chance to say I was sorry for, it's like the last thing. We have this ritual in my family whenever we depart from one another. It doesn't matter if I'm going, if I'm leaving to go to the gas station a mile away to get gas for the lawnmower, when I walk out of the house, I say, love you, bye. And everybody in the family says, love you, bye. And part of that is because of the way I left things when my father died. And I just promised myself I will never, ever leave it that way again. So I'm having this conversation after this person's read The Shack, and he is so mad about the fact that Paul Young dares to dispute the interpretation of Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, meaning God actually forsook Jesus. He's so hung up on that. And we're having this conversation, and I mean, as a pastor, I didn't hold back. And I said, look, did you read the whole book? Yes, I read the book. I said, did you read Festival of Friends? Yeah, I read that chapter. I said, well, let me tell you something. I said, I cried so hard in Festival of Friends, tears that weren't just tears of regret. I said, that book held out the possibility, the hope for me that my dad and I are already reconciled. Somehow, the two of us are already reconciled, whether I know it from my side of things or not. I said, you think I give a about some theological argument that you have with the book? I could care less about that. The Shack spurred questions in me that led me to a place where I could be at peace with things that had caused me grief and regret and had kept me awake at night for 20 years. And I'll bet you your Spanish land grant I'm not the only person that can say that. And you think I care about a theological error in the book? I mean, do you really care about the theology of a doctor who has brought you healing? Well, he doesn't believe that God forsook Jesus on the cross, so I'm going to break this arm back. It's ridiculous. It's a joke. It's one of the greatest jokes that's ever been played on the religious establishment. The greatest joke ever played on the religious establishment is when the Father, Son, and Spirit decided to redeem humanity in a baby named Jesus and did not consult with the religious leaders for permission. And another, maybe not the second or the third, because I don't have access to all of the jokes that God's played on the religious establishment, but one of the great jokes I know in my lifetime is that God sent healing to a broken pastor in Richmond through a book and didn't ask the religious establishment permission to do it. And not just me, but I don't know how many. The book sold, 20 million copies? Estimates are that for every person that's read the book, they've at least loaned it to 3, maybe 4 people. So now you're talking in the neighborhood of 80 million people, possibly, that have read the book. How many of those people do you think have been healed, maybe? At least had some kind of emotional healing, some kind of peace that God gave them through that book. I don't think you can argue with results. You can't argue with experience. You can talk to me until you're blue in the face about a God who would abandon his only begotten Son, whom he loves and delights in to his very soul in his hour of greatest need. You can talk to me about an ogre like that all day long, but you can never argue with me that that book brought healing, that God used that book to bring me healing in my life in dealing with regrets that I had about the passing of the way, not necessarily the circumstances around my father's death for me.
It is a long ends justify the means, so it's a dangerous road to start going down, that if it brings healing, it's a good thing. But
I know. I definitely do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't.
There's a good line to tread where, if you're out there playing theology police and every I needs to be dotted and T crossed, then just get over yourself and stop it.
Right.
But there are times when people have experienced some kind of short-term goodness from something that is grossly distorting the face of God,
Yeah.
And
the I'm not gay anymore kind of thing because of the shame and the judgment passed on you by the church.
Yeah. There's a spectrum of theological wrongness, and for me, it's like when you get past a certain point of just distorting the image of God and painting the wrong thing on him, then even if it has had good effects on people, all the prosperity gospel ministries out there that have supposedly healed people, even so, it ain't justified. If anything, it's a testament to how good God is to use something that's that rotten. Whereas, the shack is maybe every little thing about the Trinity in there isn't just perfect and 100% creedal to every single bit of orthodoxy, but it's man, if that's the lifeguard stand you want to sit on to police the church about, get a life, a Zoe life, get some spiritual life, because I don't know what.
Yeah, I'm just happy to be a part of this conversation, and not just on the podcast or at my church. It's a conversation that's going on all over the globe. It's a global conversation to rediscover the cosmic Christ. And we're fortunate to live at the time that we do because we have access to social media and, like this podcast and different avenues for sharing in this conversation and having dialogue. And I think that's the key to the whole thing is, are we as Christians or even agnostics or as unbelievers or as atheists, are we mature enough to have a civilized conversation around some of the questions that we have? Because I have questions that in my faith experience growing up, questions that I've asked in the last 10 years, I would not have been allowed to ask in church. I mean, I just would not. I would have been asked to leave if I'd even asked those questions. So I think it's great that we can ask questions, and there's some difficult questions that come up. And I think if we're preaching the right message, then if we're preaching the right message in a broken world, then a lot of difficult questions should come up.
Yeah, Bill, you said something a while ago that I thought was pretty poignant about the expansion and the popularity of a story like The Shack in both book and movie form, which is that, it would probably stir up the question in a lot of people who have been or grew up in the church of, why haven't we heard about this God? Or why is this God so different than the one we've been hearing about all this time? And that is fundamentally at its core a theological question, but it comes out of a place of wanting to belong and understand and be in relationship, and a very emotion-driven place as well. So the theology of it's not this separate thing from the human need and our drive to belong and to understand. And so when people ask that question of like, where has this God been? That's a question of faith and wanting to know and wanting to be part of something that looks a lot better than what maybe they feel like they're part of with the God they've kind of been handed by all of our forefathers or our religious predecessors. And that faith is seeking an understanding and is getting a glimpse of something and saying, wow, that looks pretty cool. Or I wonder if God really could be that good. Or wow, that speaks to me on a really deep level of what my soul longs for, despite me trying to have walled that up with years of my own performance, religious rituals, practice, lying to myself and others, all these little things we've built around and in ourselves to prop up our need to feel good about ourselves and just keep going through one day at a time. But it starts to chip away at that with a little bit of hope that, if it penetrates the heart, can start to ask, wow, maybe God really is that good. Yeah, it almost kind of hurts to think that God might be that good, because I've been living this life for so many decades being taught about and teaching others about a God that isn't that good. He's not even close to as good as this
he's
picture.
Mediocre at best.
Yeah. So I think that's part of where the tumult and divisiveness comes, is it's like, this is such a good picture, it almost makes you angry, like you've missed out on something, because you've been getting taught about a God who's so deficient and so distant and so self-focused and so unloving. And so, well, we'll just get right into that and talk about the God that could maybe be this good.
Yeah. Let's talk about love and justice, or maybe to kind of put them on two sides of a coin, love versus justice. Because I think that sometimes we can have this view of God where he is loving, but he's also so just, and as if they're kind of separate from one another, like in the way that we talk about it.
Yeah, that comes up a lot, especially when we're having conversations about the ontology of God, the logic of God's being, which we're told in John's epistle that God is love. And a lot of times when we're arguing, and that's probably a bad word, when we're making the case for God's love in any context, whether the context is in the context of sin or hell, or restorative justice versus retributive justice, and some of those harder topics, what'll usually happen is someone will say, yes, but God is love, and they're quoting John, and someone in the conversation will inevitably say, yes, but God is also just. And what we do in those moments, what we've done, maybe we don't even know that's what we've done, is we have equated justice with the ontology of God. And the way I like to help break that down and separate the two, and not to say that God's justice and God's love can be separated, but the two concepts, in terms of the being and the nature of God, the way I like to break that down is say, God is love, God is not justice. God is just, but he is not justice. God God is not ontologically justice. God is ontologically love.
Justice and love are nouns.
Right.
Whereas loving and just are adjectives, right? So when you say God is love, you're saying God is a noun, a thing.
Right.
The thing.
And that thing is not justice.
Yeah, the thing he is love. And then you say, but God is also just. Now you're categorically saying a different thing. You're describing his attributes.
Right.
But the way the English, it sets it up like they're symmetrical statements. But one is a statement of the noun, the thing God is comprised of as best we can understand it. The other is a statement of an adjective which describes something about his character.
Right. And I don't know how justice in the Christian conversation ever became so elevated that we can have this knee-jerk reaction to God's love in our dualism, where if we have light, we have to have dark. We have to have this balance in our way of thinking in the West, especially. I don't know how justice ever got elevated to the point where we think it can balance the scales of love, instead of seeing God's justice on the same side of the scale with love. Or if we were going to get that wrong and try to split apart the character and nature of God into these two sides, why didn't we pick mercy? Why didn't we pick compassion or comforting? You know, why did we pick justice? I think there's something fundamentally fallen about us, and I'm including myself, because look, I love to watch movies, and there's a part of me in the Clint Eastwood movies when the bad guy doesn't just get it in the end, he gets it bad in the end, and we take pleasure. What's the German word for that? Schadenfreude. We take pleasure in his.
Is that the word?
I think so. I think that Schadenfreude is it's a German
pleasure?
colloquialism for, it means dark joy. We're taking pleasure in another person's pain or misfortune. But so I include myself in that, but there's something fundamentally wrong when we want to have this other side of God, like Two-Face in the Batman comics. You know, that this profile looks very warm and friendly and loving, and then when he turns his head due to something on our account, you know, some sin that we've committed, or that some injustice that we've imposed on another person, perhaps. Then when he turns to the other profile, this profile is an angry judge. And how did we get to the point where there's two sides of the same God, and one is angry and judging, and the other one is loving? I'm not as familiar with the isms and schisms to know exactly how that happened, except to say in some 5th century theology, dualism, Greek philosophy was introduced into the Christian message and was carried into the West as a blending of the two.
In the shack, there's a lot of talk about God's love and God's justice, and even God's judgment. Could probably tie in with that. Specifically, there's a scene where Mac is talking to Papa, who represents God the Father, and he says, he's like, what about sin? You know, shouldn't people be punished for sin? And Papa says, I don't need to punish people for sin. Sin is its own punishment. For me, the question that comes up is does this God really understand what it's like for sin to hurt me so much that the pain that I feel, I dole out to others? But this is a result of sin, right? I'm not the one who caused sin. Sin is the thing that's in me that's causing this, right? Does this God understand what that's like? Is there a biblical reference that can support that conversation happening between Mac and Papa?
So the question you're asking is, how does Jesus know what it's like for us to have this propensity towards broken behavior and hurting one another. And yeah, I mean, he became flesh. Sarx, the Greek word, and there we go. You know, and these Greek words are in a lot of cases important for us to understand, just simply because, you know, we're reading a book, the Bible, that's translated from these languages, and you know, if we can understand what the original word means, then I think that's helpful. And sarx just means flesh. In every aspect, in every sense of the word. Who is it? Is it Gregory of Nazianzus, who said the unassumed is the unhealed? So whatever Jesus did not become remains unhealed. So if Jesus did not become flesh, then nothing was done to us in the incarnation. In the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus, we yet remain fallen if Jesus did not become flesh. So that's where I would go first. Jesus became flesh. He is as human as any human has ever been. In fact, I would say more accurately, Jesus is more human than any human has ever been. Because when God created us as human beings, he created us perfect, and he said it's good. So Jesus is that perfect humanity with us.
There's a scene in the shack where Jesus directs Mac to a cave, and inside the cave he meets the personified. He meets a Latina woman who's a personification of God's wisdom. Sophia. Yeah. And Sophia is hardcore. She does not hold back on the confrontation. And inside that confrontation, she asks Mac a lot of questions about judgment and judging, right? Because Mac has this need for justice. His daughter was killed by a serial killer. Shouldn't there be justice in that? His mother or his father was abusive to him and his mother. Shouldn't there be justice in that, you know? And so she goes down a line of questioning, asking Mac, you know, if you're such a great judge, today you're going to be judging your children, all 5 of your children. You're going to have to choose 2 of them to go to hell eternally, and 3 of them to go to heaven. And Mac's like, I can't do that, you know, and he gets very emotional about it. He's like, I can't do that. I don't want to be the judge. Like, it goes down to that place where it just begins to unravel those layers of understanding, where Mac's like, you know what, I don't want to be the judge anymore. And when Mac finally says, you know, how about I take their place, you know, like, let me go instead of them, right? In place of them. She says, Mac, you've judged them worthy of love.
Yeah. That's the one of the most beautiful scenes in the book and in the movie. Because what follows is the statement, now you know Papa's heart. And maybe that's the question. Is God really that good? Is God really that loving? Could it be that in the middle of all of my sin, in the middle of all of my brokenness and my shame and all of the things that I have done, are doing, or will do, that maybe perhaps our faith tradition has told us is like some kind of God repellent? You know, God can't be in the presence of sin. So, you know, I was even told one time that I shouldn't be rude to anybody in traffic, because if it caused me to have an accident and I died before I repented, then I would go to hell, because God can't be in the presence of unrepented sin and all these other things. So that's the question. Has God so judged humanity worthy of his love that in the middle of my sin and my shame and my brokenness, I actually find the Father, Son, and Spirit there working in me to heal me and to redeem me, even to redeem the situations I've created in my brokenness? right? There's a wonderful scene in the book where Mac wants retribution against the person that did this horrible thing to his daughter, and he's finding in this encounter with God so much beauty and wonder and understanding out of this tragedy. And Mac wonders if God's trying to justify what happened. And I think it's Papa who says, we're not trying to justify anything. We're working to redeem everything. And so that's a question for me. When I first read the book, there was a part inside, deep inside of me, that leapt for joy at the possibility that God could really be this good. Is it possible that God could really be this good? And then immediately as a pastor, the thought came to me, am I preaching about a God who's this good?
Right. And that's a good thing to ask that question, because it's a question that rises out of a place of concern for discernment and wisdom, and believing that what you say is the right thing to say. So sometimes even the questions of whether God is this good can also be coupled with questions of, like, am I getting this right? Whatever perspective you're preaching from, right? I think Kester might have something to say here, but I was going to ask the question, so what does God's love and God's justice look like? Especially according to Scripture and the Bible.
Okay, so justice, and I hope this is not a spoiler for anyone. Well, I'll do it a different way. So this man goes down to Florida to a nightclub, and he kills over 50 people. So when we in the West think about justice, we want him killed back. If you kill me, I'll kill you back. Or if you kill some of my people, I'll kill you back. And all that really leaves us with, in the end, is like a lingering Hatfield and McCoy kind of feud between the law-abiding and the law-breaking. And I don't think that's justice. I don't think that's the kind of justice that God has in mind for the human race. How do you weigh the life of one man against the life of 50? How could that ever be justice? Justice would say, I will give you these 50 people back. So the ultimate display of justice is the incarnate life, the incarnate death, the incarnate burial, resurrection, and the incarnate ascension of Jesus, where humanity is taken into union with the Trinity. So that if I get run over I'm in Jesus. I live and move and have my being in Jesus. And it doesn't cause me to live in a careless way. I don't sit in the road and, wait for a truck to come and hope it doesn't run over me. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm silly. But it's given me a freedom about the way I live my life. If I get run over by a bus today, I get run over by a bus in Jesus. If I don't get run over by a bus, I get run over by a bus. I'm in Jesus, living and moving and having my being. So there is justice for me whether I'm murdered today, tortured by some extremist group, and then murdered. It doesn't matter. I mean, it'll matter to me when I'm in lingering pain for hours or days. It'll matter to my loved ones who miss me, right? It'll matter to you guys, I hope.
Because we'll have to find someone new to bring on the podcast.
Yeah. So, but justice is already mine because of Jesus. It is already redeemed. And justice would also have, at some point in eternity, justice would also have me face to face with the people who murdered me so that I could give them a hug and say, I love you and I forgive you. And justice would also create the space for them to receive that forgiveness. Justice comes out of love. If God has justice, it has to come from love.
It seems like such a hard pill to swallow, to believe that we will one day love and forgive those who have hurt us, and the ones that we have hurt will love and forgive us, whether it's in this life or the next.
Yeah, the Bible says that everybody that dies is going to meet Jesus. Jesus says, all judgment's been handed over to me by my Father. And then we read in Hebrews that it's appointed for a man once to die, and after this, the judgment. So if everybody dies and receives judgment, that means everybody meets Jesus, who holds the keys to judgment. And, Dr. Baxter Kruger has been on your podcast, and he was confronted one time, and the person confronting him said, your theology has no room for God's judgment. And Baxter's response was to say, everybody's going to be judged. Nobody escapes judgment. Our problem sometimes in the West is that we don't understand what judgment is. We think judgment is about who's out and who's in, and God's going to really get these people and pay them back for all that they've done and destroy them forever, and or maybe kill them forever. He'll kill them and kill them some more. And I think the truth about judgment is that it's not about our destruction. If God is love and God's love is restorative, then judgment has to be about restoration. It has to be something like God saying to us, these things about you are wonderful, and these things about you have no place in the kingdom. Let's see what we can do about these things that have no place in the kingdom. But I don't think for a moment it's about who's out and who's in. The good outweighs the bad, so you're in, or the bad outweighs the good, so you're out. I mean, the whole of the gospel runs contrary to such thoughts. So the justice of God, God's justice and God's mercy are one and the same. His justice is about defending the weak. And guess what? If I'm imposing darkness and brokenness and pain on other people, what causes that? There's darkness and broken. I loved in the scene you referred to with Sophia, when all these scenes of young people, little kids, being whipped and abused. There's a temptation for us to hold and look, I get it. Okay, I'm an adult. The stuff that might have happened to me when I was a kid, get over it, Bill. You're an adult. You got to make better decisions. And I understand that. But I also understand it's a lot easier for me to make those good decisions if those things had never happened. And I mean, I was fortunate. I hit the jackpot when it came to parents. Like, I never heard my parents argue. My dad never went to bed without telling me that he loved me. I had a great experience with my parents. But I know plenty of people whose parents were not good to them, are not presently good to them. And making those good choices is a lot easier when we've had a better. I mean, look, I've made plenty of bad choices. I came from a good home, so who am I to judge people who had the crap beat out of them all the time and, didn't have enough to eat because their parents didn't provide for them? Who am I to judge those people? I am not a judge. If Jesus says I judge no one, if Jesus reserves judgment, then who am I to take it up as my task? Or it's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to love.
Hey, is there somewhere in the book where he says, like, I am against the things that would come between us, or I want to destroy the things that would come between us? There's a few quotes similar to that, but I thought there's somewhere where he talked about that specifically.
This anymore. I wrote those notes
because I do want to cover the power of justice as well. That He had said something like, you are going to get along with like the people that have wronged you in life and people that do horrible things, but there will be justice for them, but it's not the retribution, like, and it'll be good for them that there will be justice, because they're going to be healed. It may not be fun or easy.
Do you recall a quote by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War? He said, if I make my enemy my friend, have I not yet destroyed him? I mean, that's beautiful to me. The best way to defeat your enemy is to make your enemy your friend. And it doesn't mean that, okay, the guy's burning down my house, so I help him burn down my house, and now we're friends. That's not at all what it means. Is that we help. That one of my favorite proverbs that I especially have taught my daughters is Proverbs 27, verse 6. And it says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are death. And a lot of times, we'll have those certain friends in our lives that we should value and hold very dear, that are willing to say the hard things to us, that might even wound us for the sake of helping us correct a bad behavior. Whereas our enemies will just encourage us that everything's fine and watch us walk right off a cliff. So I think what God's justice does, God's justice turns his enemies into his friends, not because God accommodates sin. That's ridiculous. And anybody that thinks Paul Young in the shack is trying to suggest that God doesn't care about our sin has forgotten everything they've ever learned from parenting, or maybe has never been a parent, because no parent wants to see their kid destroying themselves with bad behavior and just sit idly by and say, told you. A parent's justice towards their kid, when you discipline a kid and you say, all right, well, you can't play with this toy the rest of the day, or especially for younger kids, you take something, I mean, the rest of the day, that's like an eternity. Oh my gosh, don't take my bicycle away until sundown, because I get it back at sundown, but then it's too dark to ride. The reason we do those things as parents is not because we're trying to destroy our children. We're trying to build them up. And God's justice, if it's motivated by love, if it's motivated by the very character and nature of God, and it is, then God's justice is to restore us, to make us, help us be the best us, the best version of us.
Yeah, Paul Young in the book has Max say, don't you ever get mad with any of them, referring to your kids. And God says, show enough. What parent doesn't? There's a lot to be mad about in the mess my kids have made and in the mess they're in. I don't like a lot of the choices they make, but that anger is an expression of love all the same. I love the ones I am angry with just as much as those I am not.
Speaking about justice, or speaking about judgment, there's a story in John chapter 9 where there's a man who's blind, and he's sitting by the pool of Siloam. And as he's sitting there, Jesus approaches him, and they have a short conversation, and Jesus spits on some mud on the ground, puts it in his hands, and rubs it on the blind man's eyes, and he restores his sight. It's this beautiful scene that plays out where the man can finally see, and the first thing that he sees is the face of Jesus. And then this blind man who can now see has to go in front of the Pharisees, who are the Jewish authorities, where they question him about, how is it that you can see all of a sudden? Who performed this miracle, and why did this happen, and how did this happen? And he tells them that it was Jesus. So anywho, as the story goes on, the man who can now see, Jesus finds him again, and they have a short conversation. And in that conversation, he asks him, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answers, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus says, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. And then Jesus goes on to say, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. So in that last line, that word judgment comes up. And Bill, you had an interesting discovery based on that word judgment that's used in that line. So in our English translation, we get for judgment. But what is it that you found?
The vindication of the weak. That's literally the usage of the word judgment there. It means for the vindication of the weak. So he's having this conversation with this man at the pool of Bethesda. And I love how the conversation starts. This guy had been trying to get to the pool, but he was lame in both legs for, I don't know how long it says, 30-some years. And Jesus says, what do you want? It's like, my goodness, what dignity Jesus bestows on this man to honor his personhood and distinction. What do you want? The man says, I want to be healed. So he heals him. And then going to verse 39, which you're referring to, where he says, for judgment. I came in the vindication of the weak. And I would say again, or ask, who among us is not weak? The strong man who goes into a nightclub armed to the teeth and takes over 50 lives, is he not weak? I think anybody could make a strong case that this man is broken. I mean, absolutely broken. You have to be broken to do something like that.
Yeah, it's this interesting thing where, as you read further in Jesus' story, when they're in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus and his disciples are approached by a Roman battalion, and a small fight ensues. And Jesus doesn't pick up a sword, doesn't pick up his fists. He lays it all down and surrenders himself. And these same kinds of Roman soldiers who then later nail him to a cross, with the Pharisees and other people there who are mocking him, he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Right? It's like in the same way that Jesus wants to heal this blind man and restore his dignity and personhood, as you said, would want to maybe also restore the dignity and personhood of people who are causing so much pain and brokenness.
Absolutely. I know as a parent, there is nothing, no internal or external influence in either of my two girls that would cause them harm that I would not go after to destroy. And by destroy, let's pretend for a moment that one of those influences is a person, a human being. I'm not talking about destroying the human being, but then that would be a case where whatever's causing their pain or their weakness that they're trying to impose on my kids, and that needs to be destroyed. And it really, what we're talking about is healing. We're just talking about healing. We're talking about a multi-millennial succession of broken people who are breaking people. You know the old adage, hurt people hurt people? Well, that's true. That is absolutely 100% true. When we're all busted up on the inside, there's all manner of ways that we try to medicate and deal with that pain. I mean, in the case of the shack, Mac's medication was just to shut down. He just shut down on his family. He was there, but he wasn't. You know, some of us are intrapunitive, some of us are extra punitive. I tend to be extra punitive. Like I can't find the TV remote and I blame it on the dog. What'd you do with the remote, dog? You know, because it can't be that I misplaced it. It has to be the dog picked it up and took it somewhere. You know what I'm saying? We're all broken. We're all a mess. We're all weak. And Jesus came for the vindication of the weak. He came to heal us. And the wonderful thing about our healing is that God will not destroy us for the sake of our healing. And for your listeners, let me clarify that. Because we're tangled up. I think the language Baxter uses is a box of loose coat hangers, right? Where do you start? I was in 2008. Yeah, 2008. I was at Beaver Dam Swamp Lake in Gloucester, Virginia, and a good friend of mine named Ron, who could, if you fill a pothole up in the middle of the interstate with water, he'll go catch a fish in it. And he had told me that the fish were biting down there, and I had about 8 hours of lectures that I was trying to listen to, and there's a lot of things you can't do when you're listening to lectures. You can't make phone calls, you can't do hospital visits, you can't read. But one thing I discovered that you can do when you're listening to lectures is you can go fishing, because you're all by yourself in the boat, just you and the sunlight and the fish, and you can listen to these. So that's what I did. I went to the lake and I went fishing, and I had this one species of fish that I was after, and I only had one fishing pole that was suited for it. I was crappie fishing, and I had one spool's worth of this 4-pound line. It's like fishing with spider web. It's so fine and so thin, and it would get tangled up during the day, because as you cast and reel, it gets twisted up. And so in my haste, I would just tear the line off and retie the lure. About the second or third time that it got tangled, I started to tear the line off, and I noticed that my supply was dwindling. And that was the only fishing line that was working that day. And then all of a sudden, that fishing line became distinct to me. It was the only fishing line like it in the boat. And so its value went up. Its worth increased. And I pulled the boat over into the shade, and I got out a little tiny screwdriver, and I began to work at the knots. And there were knots that I knew were causing this tangle, but I couldn't take those knots out because there were other knots in front. Maybe not. Maybe they weren't as fundamental to the tangle or foundational to the tangle, but they had to come out first. And I just broke into tears because I had an epiphany about my own life. Times when I had prayed and said, Lord, take this problem away from me. Take this proclivity toward this sin away from me, because it's a hang up. I feel like it's a weight around my neck. And what God told me in that moment was, I am untangling you, Bill, knot by knot. Be patient, but I will not rip you apart for the sake of your healing. God loves each of us as distinct persons in the cosmos and is working, trust me, in your life to heal you. If you're not experiencing emotional and spiritual or even physical healing at this point, believe me, it's coming. It is absolutely coming, or the entirety of the gospel is a lie. And it may not be in this life. It may be in the next life. There's hang-ups, maybe for me, I'm sure, that will not be dealt with until I meet Jesus face to face. But the point that I think God was making with me that day, and that Paul Young brings to the shack in this process that Matt goes through, is that these things have to be untangled in order. And let's deal with these things in the proper order, so that at the end of the process, you are still you. You're just a whole you.
So you're saying God is the kind of God who, no matter how knotted and messy the line gets, wouldn't just strip it and throw it off in the water and replace it, but would take the time to fix it. If only someplace someone with revelation about God had said multiple times that he was the kind of God who was willing that none should perish, but all come to know him.
How about this
Too
one?
bad Paul Young just invented that idea in the shack.
I know. How about this one? This is one of my favorites. Behold, I make all things new. Not, behold, I make all new things. If, sometimes, because we live in a disposable culture and a disposable society, stuff wears out and breaks, like my lawnmower engine. My lawnmower engine broke. The connecting rod that connects the crankshaft and the piston, which, if you know about that stuff, great. If you don't, it's not important. It was a big deal. The lawnmower would not cut grass anymore, which we lost prime function. right?
It's the telos
Yeah.
of the lawnmower.
Yeah, it's what you're about. It's what you're supposed to be doing. So I went to get it fixed, and the guy tells me at the repair shop, he says, "Well, these motors are disposable." Oh, he said, "Yeah, they're not designed to be rebuilt or repaired like that for these major repairs." And I was like, "Okay, so how much is a new one?" It's almost $800 for a new engine for this lawnmower. So I went to one place after another until I accumulated every part that I needed. And I'd never taken apart a lawnmower engine before, right? But I was broke. So I took it apart on a 5-gallon bucket in my office at home, because I don't have a workshop or parts washers and all that fancy stuff. So my wife is one of the most patient and loving people that anyone could ever meet. I washed all of the engine parts with Dawn dishwashing liquid in the kitchen sink and put the engine back together and cut grass with it for 2 more years until the same part broke again. And then, somebody gave me a lawnmower. But we're not disposable. Human beings are not disposable. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit never gets to a point where they say, well, that was never intended to be rebuilt. We'll just get a new one. You, sitting in your car, at your desk at work, in your living room, wherever you are, you matter so much to the Father, Son, and Spirit that they will take thousands of years, if that's what it means, to untangle you without losing you, so that you are still you. The hard part for us is to believe that, to trust it, and to be patient. And it's even harder for us. It's got to drive my wife nuts sometimes to be patient with God about his timing in untangling me. I know it's got to be. Why does he still leave the towel on the floor? Lord, why have you not untangled that part of Bill? I know it's got to be killing her. Stuff like that. And I don't mean to make light of it, but what I'm saying is that you matter. And there's no such thing as God repellent. It doesn't matter what you're doing, what you're into, what kind of sinful behavior. It doesn't mean God doesn't care about the things that are self-destructive for us.